the Naiji, there is a need to enact your story. Having the Nai first basically puts speculations of how to be as your primary really process. That's the main thing that's going on for you and that gives you momentum and meaning. So when interacting with the world, there is a need to find a character that can appropriately comport yourself to get across the character you want to play from the story you want to be in the world story. So this is one of the reasons that Naiji have a very good, they have many good attributes for spirit forming, but this one in particular relates to Mazuts. There is a need for Naiji to play characters. This is a very complex subject and relates to one of the many reasons that Naiji can be misread so often and so often misread themselves, is that first of all, that quality can unnerve a lot of Naiji. Now, some Naiji, many Naiji are very, very comfortable with that and actually enjoy the fact that it unnerves other people. But this does by nature have a rather unnerving quality. The ability to summon a character from the simulator, which is discussed in other areas, and then try to live it out. Two things that are kind of unusual is that people have a hard time understanding it, and I noticed that the 4951 is they tend to go one way or the other. One is, it seems superhuman. It seems like uber-human. And people have a hard time understanding people who can have such intensity. It doesn't even seem like it's from this place or time. So that's the upside, is that this very much relates to the simulator, but how one would enact the simulator. The shape-shifting ability is enacting the simulator. So that part often is when people do not know you're doing it. When they don't know you're shape-shifting, it looks like you are just becoming. So for example, Naiji in acting, and this comes up a lot, when they're playing like a firefighter, they look like the most firefighter who ever fought fires. And it's hard to explain, but they basically, Naiji had to some extent as well, but the Ji adds in a degree of characterizing and plus the Zai principles. There is, this is where the going native comes in, is Naiji naturally want to be a superior being. It's very important. Not superior to others, a superior being, a fine being. Yes, is that often Naiji actors feel more comfortable in a role they're playing than walking around normally. And this brings in a very complex subject, which is method acting. Is it really acting? And this is important because that's something that Naiji sort of had to live with, is that the shape-shifting ability weirds them out, and often other people get weirded out by it because you can become different characters so strongly. And this power has a tremendous capability for manipulation. But that's actually not its primary function. Its primary function is actually being a hero. Being a hero that in the real world that matches up with the one in the simulator. That's its basic job. But this requires a constant shifting and a basically creating of a character. So some Naiji are aware that they're doing this and can use it in a manipulative way. That's the unheroic way. It's not how you're supposed to be using it. Others sort of see themselves as having maybe an extremely mercurial nature, meaning that they're aware that when they're feeling like a little kid, man, they feel like a little kid better than little kids do. And when they're feeling like a badass, they can pull off dark stuff more than the dark of the dark. When they're feeling romantic, they're really, really feeling romantic and hit new peaks of that. So they take things to extremes. That's kind of that's the makeup. And this is actually bringing in, and I'm going to do a lot of referencing in the book on this, of this relates to the other. Because it takes your other always to be able to dialogue with. We've mentioned this in all the hierarchies. It doesn't matter what your mojo is. There is that relationship of being need to dialogue, so basically perceive and discern in your native tongue, in your native way, whatever that is. For the Naiji, it is this ability to become extremely flushed out characters, very intense, very galvanizing, in order to change the environment, in order to create a story. That's another part. Not just to act out a story, but to actually create a story, to basically personify a character from the story in your simulator so strongly that you make the world around you become that story. You force it to do so. Because shapeshifting, it's kind of interesting, it has a lot of connotations where manipulation, almost sometimes think of like skulky. It is even given in sometimes a almost adaptive quality, meaning like it can, but that's actually not the point of the shapeshifting. It can often, for Naiji who really focus, for example, on the survival content or context of the shapeshifting, which of course is very good at lying. That is true. It is extremely good at lying, but that's mainly the defensive use of it. It actually has, being a leprine thing of the Naiji, it actually has a very proactive quality of it's trying to move a certain story forward. And if I enact this story, I'll make the world around me get with the program. Basically, the simulator program. Basically, get with the simulator program. That's what my simulator wants. I'm still part of, say, this shape-shifting ability is that it takes a Nijai, for example, to note the authenticity of this. This is a major issue for the Naiji, is the concept of authenticity, because it's the shifting and the reason for the shifting and what vision the shifting is trying to put forward. Because the various forms may seem very different and sometimes even somewhat contradictory. So for example, there's a desire to enact the heroic. So for Naiji, I wish to enact the heroic. I think a good analogy would be, for example, in the Game of Thrones, with George R.R. Martin, in the character of Ned, and whether or not he's going to go down and help out his buddy the king, who is in a sort of a Viper's Pit court sort of scenario. And Ned, is from the North. And in the North, it's sort of more of a stoic man of honor leads, and people sort of register that way of being, go, wow, that dude knows how to be a leader, and they follow because of that. So more of a, almost sort of a Nordic stoic kind of code of conduct, as opposed to a courtly intrigue. And there is a code of conduct for that, and that's the issue. So I'm not going to say what Ned's emoji was in this context, because this is talking about Naiji specifically and things you can prove. But I'll use how a Naiji thinks. For example, myself reading that book. I'm thinking when Ned was the dude up in the North, he really enacted that character well. And he was teaching the Tao of that way to his sons in the very beginning of the book, and I think that was all correct. The issue is when he went down south, and he needed to be a different kind of person in order to help his friend out. Because if he was the king from the North, or the lord from the North, whatever he is, there's going to be an issue, because that code of conduct has problems, Zai problems, and Nai. Well, first is the Zai. That character will not be optimum for this environment. And for Naiji, these are like Iron Man suits that you put on to be ideal for the environment. So Iron Man's got a bunch of suits, but he does have like the aqua suit and the outer space suit. So you need to know, like, okay, I'm actually going into a courtly intrigue. Now his Ji is still there because it's a friend. A friend he knew from before he was in the North, or before he was the head dude up there. So Ned, as we all know, hopefully, spoiler alert, he doesn't morph into that kind of creature, and then he pays the price and he dies because he missteps in these courtly intrigues. Almost written out that it's because he could not shift his code of conduct. Now here's where a Naiji or a Naiji would see this, or even that is possible. I think that may be a lesson George Martin was teaching. If not, he was just, sort of writing down natural law. Still, the natural law was teaching that lesson. And the lesson is this. The Zai says that this character you're playing of the Lord from the North who's becoming the Hand of the King, you can't be Hand of the King playing like Lord of the North. This takes more intrigue. This takes getting information. This takes knowing how the politics work and understanding and being savvy. Now, the question is, Ji, can that be done? Meaning, two things, Ji and Nai. First is, for moral reasons, is it okay to become savvy at the way the court works in order to be a good friend to someone that you have a bond to? Yes. So that's doable. So from the Naiji point of view, this is important. That was an error. He should have shape-shifted, and he didn't. And this is important because the Ji is, that's allowed. The code of conduct is, I'm trying to help a friend out, but it takes different tools to help this friend out if I'm helping him out in his area versus if he came up to my area in the north and asked my help there. There I'm helping him mainly as the Lord of the North who's his friend. But now I'm in the south and I am Hand of the King. This is why Naiji, if they know what they're doing, make very good diplomats. They understand the different roles they play as they do different things. Ned missed this. Now, there's a good chance Ned was actually a Naiji, but he didn't do it right, which was why natural laws cut him down. And that was that once the Zai said, this is not actually going to be winnable like this, you're going to have to shift. The Ji should have said, do I have the ability morally to do that? And this is key. Let's say it was no. It could have gone either way. For the way the ship-shifting works, he could have said no, in which case he should have gone straight to the king and said, you know what, I made a mistake. I have to resign my post as Hand to the king. I can't do it right. I can't do it right. Or he says, I can do this. And to himself, he now accepts, I am playing a courtly intrigue version of my code of conduct. I'm going to shift my mode. I'm still heroic Ned, who helps out his friends and doesn't leave anybody behind who he cares about. But I have to do it different here. These are swamp adders. I was facing, snow creatures up there. Now I'm facing, a different animal. My friends, I'm still Ned Stark, who is honorable and helps his friends out, but apparently honor in this area is different. Not the principle of it, but how it's enacted. So he was not able to get over that. Then it gets to the Nai, which is it possible to fuse both? You could say yes or no, and again, if the answer is no, then he has to choose. He has to say, I'm actually going to be the Lord of the North, or I'm going to be the other one, or, which I as an Naiji would see is totally possible, fuse them into Uber Ned Stark, who actually can do both. And when he goes into his room and he's talking to his Northmen in King's Landing, he speaks to them in the Northman speak and lets them know he's still basically the dude who rolls that way. But we're dealing with swamp adders here. When he walks outside, he basically shifts into courtly Ned, who does the polite things and tries to figure out what's going on and knows to watch what everyone's saying and recognizes that doesn't spoil natural law's beauty as far as virtue. He still can have that more pure way of looking at it when he is with his Northmen, but he's just in a different area with different people. So he needs to be a different Ned. Now this gets tricky because Ned may worry. He may worry, what is Catelyn going to think if she sees me doing this? Maybe she's never seen Ned lie, and so easily. Or do you mean maybe that would make her very weirded out? Or maybe his kids have never seen him do that. Maybe watch something go on that is maybe his code of conduct has an issue with. But in the courtly ways, you don't show your hand so much. You wait to the right moment of ritual to show your hand. Whereas a different kind of thing in a hero's hall with a bunch of northern warriors, if someone did a code of conduct that you really didn't like, you would show your displeasure much more readily. That's the correct thing to do. That character would show, blade out like you mistreated a woman. Where, for example, in politics, that could be a ploy in certain settings to get you to show yourself. So it's foolish to do that. You have to kind of go into character because that character is better suited to get your actual nigh heroic goal done. So that this is something why I'm kind of going on here, but shapeshifting it's a burden Naiji have to bear, which is they can shapeshift into almost anything. They'll be ideally suited to do something. And the question is that doable, both morally and masterful? Could they pull it off? So does that make sense?
Yes.
Finally, going native, and this relates to why the actual desire of it is to be heroic, is Naiji have a innate tendency, and this is one of the reasons they break a lot of records. They go native, but they don't go normal native. They always go special native. And that is, they Nai and Ji what makes a community work and who are respected people. That's important to Naiji. This can be Achilles' heel if it is not done correctly, but it's actually innately heroic. The most respected people in the village, who are they and why? And once that happens, the Zai will come in and pull out the principles. So for example, often a Naiji will be, many of the Naiji, I'm almost certain, looking at the demographics we can prove now in modern times, the chances that many of the early pioneers were Naiji is very, very high. And you're going to see a lot of that kind of phenomenon where they don't really become Indians, they become this sort of feral hybrid, where they're like a cowboy pioneer and then they meet Indians and they basically take all the best things that they do from being an American pioneer and they combine it with everything cool. So they speak a little French, they use the Indian ways of tracking, they have a special knife from wherever, and they basically become ideally suited for the environment. This is why it's going native, but ironically, oftentimes natives will look up to that. Everyone will look up to that because the goal is to walk in and look and observe at what are the people who are looked up to doing and why. And you can actually Zai it to be just like them or better. Avatar is a classic example. Once the guy came in, he was able to figure out, okay, this is what makes you guys consider really cool, and then I'm going to take that and go to another level. Because it basically tells you what the levels of heroic ranking are. And that's extremely important to both the directive romantics, is that. So it's important that people know that that is a heroic drive to shapeshift in that way, but it can go very, very bad, so a lot of people have a fear of that. For example, is the going native in the way we talked about. There are a lot of, for example, gangsters and criminal leaders. We're talking like epic, visionary criminals here, record breakers. And it often goes to, if you listen to their biographies, they say a very similar thing was, I looked around me and I saw who the men of respect were. It's very, very big in the psyche. The direct romantics also shows some degree, but not so much a voyeuristic studying, a just studious trying to break down what makes a respected member of the tribe. And unfortunately, if it goes bad, for example, in the area of lots of crime with low income, Naiji may look and go, I see how this works. The people who get to swagger are the ones who break the rules. And the ones who get respect are the ones who are not foolish enough to buy in and aren't foolish enough, this isn't necessarily true obviously, but aren't foolish enough to be concerned about killing people or blowing things up or other things like that. That's for fools, because that's going to be inaccurate, but the Naiji will look and try to figure out who is the one who rises up. It should be for heroic reason. Now that is actually done wrong. A true heroic shapeshifter would be like, I need to invent a new character. That takes a lot of balls to create a custom shape-shifted character. But all Naiji will have a tendency to look at what the best do and start trying to emulate that in order to take on that mojo, that power, that indefinable something that makes people look up to you. Naiji need that. They require that. But they shouldn't take shortcuts. So shape-shifting is the thing they need to reach their greatest heights, but it's also what they use to cut the most corners. So it's a very, very tricky subject and very complex, as most things in Naiji are.